What's up everyone, Coach D here with the Shift Method. Got another YouTube video for all of you. This one kind of similar to the ankle rehab video I made. We're gonna talk about if you injure your hamstring, what do? As always, big disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physical therapist. So if you think you have an injury, please make sure to always consult a professional and make sure you get yourself taken care of. This is just my anecdote using my exercise science knowledge as well as my experience dealing with this injury and working with doctors and physical therapists alike. So, what do I think is going on with my hamstring? Well, this is an injury that I had back in undergrad and that has kind of gone into remission and then re-aggravated over time. Luckily, I found a strategy that really helps it, and so I haven't really had an issue with it for about 2 years, but it flared up again. It do be like that sometimes, so I'm gonna go over all the ins and outs of what I think is going on, how to rehab it, and then how you, if you're dealing with this injury, can also work to fix it in your kind of training process. First off, we got to go over the hamstring anatomy a little bit to provide some context for how we can rehab the injury. So the hamstring muscle is located on the back of the thigh. It's a three-headed muscle, and its main responsibilities are with hip extension and knee flexion. So think about doing exercises like deadlifts for the proximal part, the part that's closest to your butt, and then exercises like hamstring curls where you bend your knee actively. It's also a muscle that works a little bit with internal and external rotation of the hip. And of course, in an athletic context, it really works with sprinting mechanics. So anytime you're picking up speed, anytime you're accelerating, the hamstring works a lot in that regard. And that's why sometimes you see athletes focus on the hamstring for development, but also you might see it as a common place of injury for people like sprinters, cross-country runners, and football players because of how much force and how frequently it's used. So the injury that I'm going to focus on today is what's known as a proximal tendinopathy. That's a fancy way of saying the proximal part of your hamstring, the part that's closest to your butt where it inserts kind of on your pelvis, is aggravated and having some tissue remodeling issues. Tendinopathy is kind of now the new word over tendonitis in a lot of senses because in this injury, you don't necessarily have inflammation, right? If you have this injury and you go to look at like the area where it's hurting you, you may not have any kind of swelling or discoloration like you would in a normal hamstring strain. Whereas if you're running and you pull your hamstring, it might swell on you, it might turn black and blue. That is not happening in this case. You kind of just have this sharp, deep pain kind of in the crease of your hip or kind of by your butt area. So kind of making that distinction is important for this injury. So what's thought to cause this issue is kind of a tissue remodeling issue, meaning that you're trying to progress in your training over time and you're just giving too much for your hamstring, especially the part where it transfers force from the muscle into your hip, and the tissue cannot remodel at the rate at which you're giving it demand. So whether that's working on a lot of hip hinging movement, a lot of speed work, your hamstring just isn't able to keep up with it, and that tissue starts getting very aggravated and usually responds with a change in your tolerance through pain, or the function of your exercises actually starts going down over time. So how do you rehab it? Like, what does the process kind of look like? Again, always make sure you consult a doctor or PT first to make sure this is actually what you're dealing with. But again, generally you're gonna have that really sharp and deep pain in the glute area, decrease in function, and some kind of pain that you're having that's causing those issues. What you're gonna focus on are a couple things. Number one is load management, meaning you may have to lower the weights of what you're doing. You may even need to start with body weight and find a load that is appropriate for you that doesn't aggravate your symptoms. For example, if deadlifts really bother it, you may have to stop doing 225 on deadlift and maybe start with just the bar and then gradually ramp it up over time. Another thing that seems to really aggravate it, and this is very true for me because there's individuality to it, is tempo or speed of training. So the hamstring is really responsible for acceleration, right? So going from a stop to picking up a sprint. You may have to do away with your speed work for a little bit, and in your lifts, you might have to slow down the cadence. So where you might usually go like quit very fast with your lifts, you might have to do like a 3-1-3 tempo where you're nice and controlling the way down and then going slow on the way up, and then gradually bringing that tempo up over time to where your tissue can tolerate it. Another thing is you might have to change the range of motion. Going back to that deadlift example, you may not be able to hinge very well in the beginning where you kind of get to the bottom of that deadlift and it's really just causing a lot of pain. Even if you're doing just a body weight movement, it may be painful to go into certain ranges of motion. So find a range of motion you can tolerate and then gradually try and get deeper and deeper into it over time. And then lastly is stimulus control. All these tools that I just gave you, range of motion, speed change, etc., those are part of it. You may have to do exercises or even some stretching in this case that can help desensitize the muscle. Now, I know if you know me a little bit, you hear static stretching, you're like, Damien, I thought you don't do any of that bull crap. What's up with that? this is one of those examples where static stretching in of itself is not unique, but it can be a stimulus that kind of changes what you normally do, and it can cause your hamstring to relax a little bit. And so that way your body understands that, hey, it's okay to have tension. It is okay to have some activation of this muscle. I'm not worried about that. And so introducing that and some other mobility exercises can actually help calm your hamstring down a little bit. Okay, so some other considerations. Number one, kind of like what I said with the ankle rehab video, you're gonna see a lot of similarities. You do not want to avoid exercise. This can be quite a painful process, and that is understandable because it's an injury to the hamstring area. But the last thing you want to do is avoid exercise altogether. Again, that goes into now you start becoming inactive and detrained, and that can cause other issues down the road. So you want to train, but in a way that's smart and that gradually progresses you over time. Do not avoid exercise. Number two is that pain may be part of the process. A lot of times people think that if I'm experiencing any kind of pain, that is a bad thing. I need to avoid it. I need to stop. While of course we don't want to exacerbate the pain of what's going on, you certainly don't want to just stop anytime you feel any kind of negative sensation. Kind of have a threshold for yourself where this is kind of not tolerable. And as long as you don't go above that threshold, pain is going to kind of be part of the process throughout. But as long as it's going down over time, you're going to be making progress. Another big thing, and I can say from someone who can get a little bit antsy at times with their training, this is one of those injuries that does take time. It is a tendon. Tendons don't always have the best of blood flow to the area, and so the healing process can take a couple of months. For me, the injury started kind of right around early to mid-January, and by the time this is coming out, we're gonna be kind of in mid to late March. So it's about a 2-month process for me. Usually it takes about 2 to 3 months for me, and that's someone who knows the injury and knows how to rehab it. So although it may be long, try your best not to get frustrated and just buy into the process. Progress isn't linear. That kind of goes with any goal, but understand that you're gonna have ebbs and flows. You're gonna have times where you're gonna say, fuck it, man, this is annoying, this is frustrating, I feel like I'm not making progress. Understand that it is okay to not progress every single day. As long as you stay with the course, respect these principles, you're gonna make progress and you're gonna be healthy again. Okay, so just some little highlights. You're gonna see some videos here of my rehab process. A lot of the principles that I talked about. For me personally, the biggest thing that bothers it is tempo and speed. The load on the bar doesn't really bother me. So what I did in my training is first, I reduced a lot of my hip hinge movements, and anytime I did a squat, a leg press, anything that involved my hip, I really lowered the tempo. So a lot of my lifts here, you're gonna see I started with a 3-1-3 tempo, meaning I started 3-second eccentric, pause at the bottom, 3-second concentric. That felt really good on my hamstring, did not aggravate my symptoms, and so I started there. Over time, I gradually picked up the tempo to where I was lifting at a normal rate. Also, I do a lot of basketball training for those who know me, so a lot of my speed work there, a lot of my playing time, a lot of my dunk practice, I had to kind of put that kind of to the side for a little bit where I wasn't playing full court pickup 100%. I started at a speed and a rate that didn't bother me, and then gradually over time, I increased how fast I went, how high I jumped, and how much effort I put into doing that. And that changed my conditioning too, where I went to more steady state training instead of a lot of high intensity interval training. I also did a lot of different warm-ups and hip movements. So I did a lot of glute activation, a lot of hammy work. You'll see here I did some static stretching as well, again, to desensitize the tissue. And then of course I did a lot of hamstring prep where I did things like glider bridges, glute bridges, and as well as some glute ham raises and some variations of that to strengthen my hamstring over time. And then lastly, of course, we got to reintroduce those exercises, right? So I started bringing back the plyos, started bringing back the hip hinge movements until it was at a place where it didn't bother me anymore. And then I was back to normal training as per usual. And that's it, everyone. Again, this is not medical advice, not a doctor, not PT. Please consult your physician if you think you're dealing with a hamstring injury. But if you are someone who's dealing with this, I hope this is helpful to you. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts now. You can find me at _shift_method. And as always, thank you all so much. Hope you have a wonderful day. See ya.